In the case that I'm going to discuss today, you're going to hear how my client was rear-ended by a fully loaded tractor trailer, and the tractor trailer blamed her, at least in part, for the crash. The data that comes from black boxes is especially important in truck crash cases because it can help essentially reconstruct what happened. So let's set the stage. My client is driving a sedan on a 4-lane road. Based on a map, you can see she's approaching an intersection. We know that on this particular day, the highway was level, the roads were dry, the conditions were clear, there was no debris on the roadway, and the truck driver had been on this stretch of road at least 20 times in the past. It was also a 55-mile-per-hour zone. The truck driver was driving a fully loaded tractor trailer that weighed 76,000 pounds. Also, my client's recollection of the crash was spotty. She was around 78 years old when the crash happened, and it was our position that she sustained a mild traumatic brain injury as a result of this crash. That according to her, she was stopped at a red light. The truck driver's story was very different. First, he gave this written statement to the responding police officer. And as you can see from his written statement, my client was stopped in front of him, and he says that she was stopped at a red light. Now, what's interesting, he gave this story to a police officer in writing within hours of the crash happening before he had an attorney who was representing him. We ended up filing suit in this case, and I took that driver's deposition. And in his deposition, he gave a story that was quite a bit different than his written statement right after the crash. According to him in his deposition, he said that he was about 300 feet away from the light. And at that time, the light was green. He said that he saw my client ahead of him approximately 200 feet. So that would have meant that she was about 100 feet away from the light. He said that there were no vehicles between him and her and the light. So I asked him, was she moving when you saw her? And he said, I'm not sure. What he did recall was that he wanted to check his speed because according to him, there was a speed change in the road up ahead. So he said that he looked down for a few seconds to check his speed, and he denies doing anything else during that time. According to him, when he checked his speed, it was 45 miles per hour. And he said that it took him a few seconds to check the speed. Now, that seems suspicious to me, so I asked, why did it take you a few seconds to check your speed? Normally, that's something you could glance down, glance up, and keep going. And he said, well, because most of the time when you look, you check all your gauges. That's just a habit. It's just, whatever it takes. I don't know how long it takes. So he's essentially saying that during this time period, I was doing my job and trying to keep other people safe by looking down and examining whether I'm going the proper speeds. So the driver says he looks at his gauges and he looks back up, and here's what he testified he saw next. And when I looked back up, all I seen was her brake lights, and my next stop was trying to miss it. So I double checked my mirrors to make sure I could make the lane change, but by then I was too close to her. So I followed up on that, and I said, what color was the traffic light then? And his response was, I don't recall. I asked, how far away from the light was she when you saw all this, when all of this was happening? He said, I don't know. I had another follow-up question. So you could not tell that she was stopped? And he said, no. And he said, I couldn't tell, no. And then I said, well, then how did you know that you had to avoid her then? And his answer was this: because the brake lights was on, and it looked to me the back of the car was higher than the front, like, she hits her brakes or something. Question: so are you suggesting that she came to a sudden stop? Answer: that's what it looked like. So the stage has been set by the truck driver. According to him, he's going 45 miles per hour, driving appropriately, checking his gauges. Then, while he's checking his gauges, my client comes to an abrupt stop. And he doesn't remember exactly what color the light was, but she comes to a stop abruptly enough that the back end of her car is lifted up, he has no opportunity to react, and he has to crash into her. And then compounding things a little bit, my client has a brain injury, things are foggy, she doesn't recall everything but believes she was stopped at a red light. So in a nutshell, he's saying that my client was at least partially at blame for this crash and that there was nothing he could do to avoid it. This is where the black box data comes in. So for this particular truck, the black box is essentially a little computer that is running, that is monitoring the engine as the truck is driving down the road. And it's measuring different things like acceleration, speed, brakes, the throttle percentile. Once there's a hard braking event, the event data recorder reaches back 60 seconds in time and starts recording. It captures that data. So in this case, we downloaded the black box data from the tractor trailer, but we also downloaded the black box data from my client's car. And we're now going to look at that data to see if it either supports or destroys either one of these witnesses' testimony. Because we've got a he said, she said. And now we need to figure out which one of them is telling the truth. Okay, so here is the truck's data. So as you can see at the top, there's some identifying information about the engine, about the date, about different things like that. And you could see that there is a deceleration, and then you could reach back in time 60 seconds here. And if you look at this top graph, you can see that the vehicle was traveling, and it looks like it's traveling in the high 50 mile per hour range, almost 60 miles per hour. And you can see that it was maintaining that speed, then dropping a little bit, and then coming to a sudden deceleration and eventual stop. And if you look down, you can see that there's a graph that shows brake application. And you can see that the vehicle brakes were applied precisely when the vehicle was doing a rapid deceleration. But there's also a table that is part of this data. And this shows that the truck was going along at 59 miles per hour, 58, around that speed, very steadily. And so this suggests that the cruise control was on at that time, up until 9 seconds before the hard braking event. And 0 is the hard brake moment. And that's approximately when the impact between the vehicles occurred. This data shows that it looks like the cruise control went off about 8 seconds before impact, but no brakes were applied at that time. But the truck slowed down from about 58 miles per hour to 54 miles per hour, but still no brakes were applied. And then 1 second before the brakes were applied, and the truck goes from 52 miles per hour to 9 miles per hour in approximately 7 seconds. So what does this data tell us? Well, it shows us first and foremost that the driver was not accurate about the speed he was going. He testified he was going 45 miles per hour. He was actually going about 58 to 59 miles per hour for most of that time leading up to the crash. Now that doesn't necessarily disprove his story. It doesn't prove our story, because he could have been going 58 miles per hour and our client still could have abruptly stopped in front of him, leaving him no alternative but to crash into her. Because again, his story was that the back end of her car was lifted, which is due to the momentum from a sudden stop. And so this data could still support that story. But this data does help because it does tarnish his credibility a little bit. Because now we can say, wait a second here, he's playing a little fast and loose when it comes to his speed. So maybe he's not being completely honest about other things as well. This is where the black box data from my client's car comes into play. So my client was driving a passenger car. She had an event data recorder or black box in her vehicle as well. But like the truck system, the car's black box data has a couple of data points that are really interesting for us to focus on. This car's event recorder was triggered by a strong pulse. And so a strong pulse, once there is an impact and then the vehicle has forces that are thrust upon it, it measures those and it picks up from there and it reaches back in time. In this case, only 5 seconds, but it reaches back in time and starts recording from there. And so here is that crash data. And what does this show? At 5 seconds before the pulse, my client's accelerator was at 0. Her brakes were on. Her engine RPM was low. Her throttle was low. But most importantly, for 5 seconds before this impact, her speed was 0. Her speed was 0. Same for 4.5 seconds before impact. Same for 4 seconds before impact. Then you can see 3.5 seconds before impact, it looks like the brake was let go and the vehicle moved a little bit. And it actually, you can see it registered 3 seconds before that it was going 1 mile per hour. And what could that be? It's somebody who has stopped at a red light and they inch their car forward just a little bit. And 3 seconds before impact, the brake is back on, even though the vehicle just had that little bit of momentum and it reached 1 mile per hour. By 2.5 seconds, everything is stopped again. Same for 2, same for 1.5, and it stayed that way up until the moment of impact. So her vehicle was stopped. She was going 0 miles per hour, no cruise control, and you can see with this second view, there was no cruise control on. She is stopped. There's no question about that. This data tells us a story, and the data does not lie. My client was stopped at a red light. She had been stopped at a red light. She did not suddenly stop fast enough for her back end to come up. This driver was not driving 45 miles per hour. He was driving closer to 60 miles per hour. But he wasn't paying attention. He looked down at something for who knows how long. When he looked up, he suddenly realized my client was stopped. It was a red light. There was nothing he could do. He crashed into her, and she sustained a terrible brain injury. And her life was forever changed as a result. This case settled, but it was a hard-fought battle. Even though it was a rear-end collision, there was nothing that was handed to us. We had to fight every step of the way. And you could see how getting this information right at the outset after this crash was vitally important. And if we had not done that with a vehicle inspection of the truck, a vehicle inspection of the car, a download by a properly qualified and trained expert using the proper equipment and establishing the chain of custody, if we had not done those things right at the outset, this would have been a different result. And it is so vital that that be done right at the outset. For those of you who you've either been in a crash or maybe a family member or a loved one has been in a bad truck crash, if that's you, you want to make sure that the attorney that you hire knows truck crash cases. And you want an attorney who handles truck crash cases, and you probably want an attorney who is board certified in doing that. An experienced truck crash attorney is going to jump on this type of a situation immediately, send out letters to preserve evidence. They're going to take steps to gather the evidence, and they're going to get all of this because they know that this is going to be a fight, and they know that they're going to have to prove every single aspect of that case. So make sure you get an attorney who is qualified in handling truck crash cases if you are looking for an attorney. In any event, I hope this is helpful, but I do thank you for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. Please consider liking this video, and please stay tuned for more videos. Thanks so much.